Senator Yee, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Here's a series of questions here from the assistant editor at GameCyte.com, Sean Hollister. Sean's first question is, what is it about video games specifically, as opposed to other medium that depicts violence, that you think requires further legislation?
Well, the bill that we had that was signed into law is a bill that deals with what we call interactive violent video games. It's not just any violent video game, it is the interactive nature of these violent video games that are particularly harmful to our children. This is where literally youngsters are sitting in their with their computer and pushing buttons, not 100 times, but thousands and hundreds of thousands of times, whereby their action is coordinated with what happens to a human being, happens to an individual. So pushing a button will then decapitate someone. Pushing a button will hack off a limb of a particular individual, burning some individual. It is this interactive nature that connects your behavior to the particular consequence that is particularly horrific.
And Dan Allen, the editor at Amish Otaku, asked a similar question regarding the early efforts against comic books and communism and un-Americanism in the middle of the century, and even rap music. So what is your response to that?
Well, those are not what we call, interactive activities. These are what we call passive activities. You just simply read some, and that's pretty much it. Or you observe something, and that's pretty much it. In these ultra-violent video games, it is the interactive nature where you literally have to do certain things in order to cause a particular consequence. And so your brain chemistry and your brain sort of connections are now set where by doing certain things, you cause certain horrific activities to occur. It is that interactive nature that we're trying to really get at.
And aside from the violence, is there anything inherent in video games that you find harmful or that parents should be concerned about?
Well, as someone who really supports the First Amendment, I think it's extremely important that we allow individuals to freely express their art, their passion about how they want to display that particular art. So I'm not opposed to any of these violent video games. It is where these games are made available to children, I think that is particularly reprehensible. As a child psychologist, I think that regardless of its interactive nature, but I think all different kinds of medium, parents should in fact sit down with their children and to talk about what is it that they see, to help them understand the context of whatever the behavior may be, whatever the information is shared with them either on TV or on video games. But our bill was always about the interactive nature of these ultra-violent video games.
And so do you find it appropriate that kids play video games in general, or do you think they should be doing other activities?
Well, there are good things about video games. They are, in fact, a teaching tool. They are a learning tool for our children. There are ways in which, because of the way the information is set up, you absolutely learn things out of these violent or regular video games, but also these ultra-violent video games will teach you things too.
And what about sexual content and nudity in video games? What is your response to?
As someone who supports the First Amendment, I think that adults should, in fact, have access to whatever the material that society deems appropriate. We should not, in fact, bar individuals' expression and participation in artful presentations of material. But the issue, again, is not about censorship. It is about not allowing our children to have access to activities, games that clearly have been demonstrated to have harmful effects towards them.
And you've been a frequent critic of the Entertainment Software Rating Board. How do you suggest that they improve?
Well, I think there's two major problems with the ESRB, the rating board. One is that there is a conflict of interest. The money that is used to sustain their particular activity are paid by the industry that board supposedly is trying to regulate. So long as you have that conflict of interest, there's no way that anyone's going to believe that these rating scores are going to be objective. Number two, the ratings are not valid. Because the way in which you determine those ratings is that you give you get a snippet of these particular video games. The industries will provide you with some of the information that causes one to rate a game in a particular way. So by getting the information from the industry, number two, not being able to look at all the content, the rating system is a flawed and an invalid system. It is those two reasons that I don't believe that the ESRB rating is accurate for our parents to make some informed decisions about whether or not these games are appropriate for kids.
And do you feel that developers have any responsibility here, or should they be able to develop any game they want?
Well, I believe, again, in the First Amendment, and so to that extent they should be able to develop whatever they want to do within the laws of this particular country. But with that said, it seemed to me that, again, society has a responsibility to protect our children. Just as we have laws that prevent children from working 40 hours a day or 40 hours a week rather than going to school. There are child labor laws. There are many other laws that protect the interests of children, and in this particular case, that's what our bill was trying to do, to protect the interests of kids so that they're not exposed to these ultra-violent video games.
Alex Mejia from Corona, California asks, considering even the FBI has statistics that show that the crime rate is dropping even when games such as Grand Theft Auto have increased in popularity, what proof is there that violence in games creates violent tendencies?
Just because the statistics somehow indicate that there's a drop in violence does not mean that somehow we have not found a relationship between these ultra-violent video games and violent tendency along with children. One has to ask the question, when we were looking at some of the statistics about 10, 20 years ago, you didn't hear about Columbine shootings. You didn't hear about college students shooting down and mauling down a number of their fellow students. You didn't hear about, in San Francisco, a couple of days ago, you had a first grader bringing a gun onto campus. It is these kinds of data that suggest that the ultra-violent video games are being used and looked at, practiced by kids, and then during daylight or during other times that they actually practice these kinds of behavior.
Timothy Anderson from Minneapolis, Minnesota references a book called Grand Theft Childhood, in which two Harvard graduates conducted an apparently large-scale study that showed that there was no link between violent video games and violent behavior. What is your response to that?
I haven't read the study and all that, but in all of the psychological literature, there has been a consistent reporting of a correlation between playing these games and violent behavior. So that is undisputed. The question, I think, always has been whether or not there is a cause and effect. And when there is a preponderance of these correlational data that suggests a relationship between these ultra-violent video games and violence itself, that we err on the side of safety, we err on the side of our children, and we treat them as causal relationship. And that is the reason why in a number of jurisdictions, they have used that information to argue why, in fact, we should ban the sale of these ultra-violent video games to our children.
And Richard Pyle from Santa Ana, California asks about a game called America's Army. It's a first-person shooter game made by the U.S. government designed to help the Army recruit. It's rated T for teen. It's as close a game that has come to a murder simulator. Richard asks, why is a game like Grand Theft Auto 4 an M-rated game? Do you consider, or do you even consider it to be more of a threat than a game that simulates our own Army's rigorous boot camp training?
We have always been consistent in saying that these ultra-violent video games is what we're trying to get at. It is these ultra-violent nature within the game, that kind of technology that helps wire our children's brain to taking certain kinds of action and then causing these kinds of horrific consequences of chopping some head off or chopping limbs off or urinating on someone, setting someone on fire. It is the interactive nature that we're trying to really get at, and consistently we have said that these kinds of games are not really appropriate for our children.